Hello, I'm Robin, and welcome to BookSpin. It's time for another book review trio. Now, it's been a little while since I've done one of these, and today I'd like to focus on a special theme, and that is what's known as the Big Three. Those are the big three authors of classic 20th century science fiction. And they are Arthur C. Clarke, Robert Heinlein, and Isaac Asimov. So it's been a little while since I've read any of these authors, actually. So I've picked three of their most well-known novels, and I'm going to review each of them. Starting off with Arthur C. Clarke, the first one I read, and for him I chose 2001: A Space Odyssey in this lovely Folio Society edition, which is very nice quality, includes some gorgeous illustrations. Have a look at that. So it's very tempting to pick this up and start off reading this one. And this novel was first published in 1968, and it was written concurrently with the production of the Stanley Kubrick film, which of course is very famous. I do like the movie. I think it's got some amazing cinematography. It's a masterpiece of visionary filmmaking. But you do have to be in the right mood, in the right frame of mind, I think, to watch it. So I was very curious to see how the book fares in comparison. I was hoping that the book could explain some things that were kind of left ambiguous in the film. And I think it does do that. I feel like I've got a clearer understanding now of the meaning behind the story, although there are still some aspects that are quite enigmatic. But I really enjoyed reading it. It's beautifully written. It's a great companion piece to the film. If you haven't seen the film, it doesn't matter. I don't think you need to watch it to enjoy this. It's a very impressive novel in its own right. So 2001 is a very grand and epic tale. It explores humanity's foray deep into the frontiers of space. And the story is divided into multiple distinct acts, starting off with an episode deep in our distant past in prehistoric Africa. So we start off the story, and there's a band of primitive hominids, and they discover a mysterious monolith in the savannah. It's clearly alien in origin, and this monolith has some kind of profound effect on them. It triggers an evolutionary event. So it basically uplifts these hominids. So they learn how to use tools for the first time. So that's basically the prologue. And then we skip forward a few million years to modern times. And then another alien monolith is discovered, but this time it's on the moon, in a moon excavation. So humanity has advanced a lot in this time. And this particular monolith is given the name TMA-1. And upon discovering this monolith on the moon, it emits a radio transmission. And this points all the way to one of the moons of Saturn, which is Iapetus. So this prompts a mission to investigate. So we get a manned spaceship called Discovery 1 that sets out on an epic journey across the solar system to this moon of Saturn to try and find out what's going on there. And that is the main bulk of the story. We've got 5 astronauts who are sent on this mission, although only 2 of them will stay conscious for the whole journey, while the other 3 get put to cryogenic sleep. And what follows is a wondrous voyage through space that's both exciting and compelling to read, and it's also pretty nerve-wracking at times. I really enjoyed reading this. I think this novel is a great showcase for the quality of Clarke's prose. It's frequently awe-inspiring, and I think it successfully evokes the wonders and the terrors of space travel and the mysteries that await us deep in the cosmos. So if you've watched the movie, you will recall that this is very memorably achieved through some very spectacular imagery and a haunting score. But I think Clarke captures this equally well. He creates the same vibe through his prose in this book. And this is a rare example of a movie and a novel pairing that seem to complement each other particularly well. I was never bored when reading this, and even though I sort of knew where the story was heading because I already knew the film, it was still very gripping to read. It's very tight as a story. It's very well paced. It's well structured, and it's solid and enjoyable to read. I think the only thing you could say is lacking is character development, which is pretty much non-existent. We get a very small cast of characters, and the astronauts on board the ship are very forgettable. We learn almost nothing of their personalities or their backstory. So if that's something that you look for in a book, this may not appeal to you. I think there's only really one character that is at all interesting, and I think that's Hal, the onboard ship AI, and he's not even human. And if you've ever watched the movie or read this before, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But this is not a story about character. This is a novel about big themes, things like humanity's place in the universe and the possibility of extraterrestrial life and the next stage of our evolution. And I think that Clarke explores these ideas in a very compelling and beautifully written way. So I really enjoyed this. I would say 2001: A Space Odyssey definitely deserves to be called a science fiction classic, and I'm going to give it a rating of 4.5 stars. So that was 2001. I read that a few weeks ago. I've read a few other things in the meantime. But among the big three, the next thing that I read was Robert Heinlein. And for this one, I chose Stranger in a Strange Land, published in 1961 in this nice Penguin Galaxy hardback. And this is one of his best-known novels. It won the Hugo Award in 1962. And it's had quite a big impact over the years. It had quite an impact on the counterculture of the 1960s. It's also attracted a fair amount of controversy over the years. Some people love it and rank it as one of their all-time favourite novels, and some people hate it. So I wanted to see what the fuss was about and form my own opinion. It's certainly got an intriguing premise. In a nutshell, this is a story about a Martian-born man who comes to Earth. He causes a big stir, and he becomes a kind of religious figure. And he challenges our ideas and our customs on things that we take for granted. Things like religion and sex and death and money. And this man is called Valentine Michael Smith, or Mike. And he's a very interesting character. He's physically human, but he was born on Mars. And he grew up on Mars without any human influence. So to put that in context, in the book's backstory, we find out about the first manned mission to Mars. So he was born among the colonists in that first mission. But all of the other colonists died out, including his parents. But Mike survived. He was the only survivor. And he was raised on Mars by Martian natives. We don't learn a lot about the Martians. We learn a bit about them, but they're very mysterious. They're an advanced race with a civilization very different to ours. And years later, the Martians send Mike back to Earth once he's a grown man, and he finds himself in America, where he encounters other humans for the first time. And this is where the novel begins. So it's a bit of a culture shock, as you might imagine. The Martian values and customs that he grew up with are totally at odds with the human culture he now finds himself in. So Martian society has no concepts of money or property or government. And what's more, they practice a ritual form of cannibalism after someone dies. So these are just some of the kind of things which clash with human culture. And when I say someone dies, their whole idea of death is totally different. They don't even use the term die. They say discorporate. And this is just one of a number of Heinlein specific phrases that keep recurring throughout the text, alongside things like grokking and water brother. So, at the start of the story, Mike's arrived on Earth and he's being kept under observation in a military hospital. Then a nurse who works at the hospital finds evidence of a government conspiracy, and she believes that he might actually be in danger from the authorities. So she sneaks him out of the hospital, and with the help of a reporter who is her lover, she takes him into hiding. But the authorities quickly catch up with them. Secret Service agents break into their home. They've got them surrounded. And then we get the ultimate Deus Ex Machina. Mike somehow manages to make these agents disappear miraculously. They just vanish into thin air, or they discorporate, to use the book's parlance. So right away it becomes clear that Mike is no ordinary human. He's got some kind of mystical, superhuman powers. So he can make people and objects disappear at will. And this is just one of his many supernatural abilities. So you've got this very intriguing character with almost godlike powers. And at the same time, he knows nothing of the ways of this world, and he's undergoing this massive culture shock. So it's a very interesting situation we've got at the start of the book. And then he takes refuge in another home, in the home of a character called Jubal. He's quite an important figure. He becomes his friend. He's an attorney, and he's an author. And from here we watch Mike's character unfold, and it becomes a bit of a character study. So I enjoyed this early part of the book, because we're still quite early on in relative to the whole novel. I enjoyed this early part of the book the most. The first 200 pages or so. I think Mike's character building is very entertaining, and I was actually surprised by the amount of humour there was. It's a lot less dry than I thought it might be. The dialogue and the character dynamics are often amusing, if nothing else. But it's not very long until the story takes a different turn. The plotting slows down a lot, and then we get a lot of extraneous dialogue and exchange of ideas as Mike gradually finds his place in the world. Ultimately, he becomes a celebrity and he starts attracting followers, and he goes on to lead a kind of new religious movement, and he starts preaching radical alternative ideas and lifestyles, force people to reevaluate traditional institutions, things like monogamy and money and religion. And this is where some of the book's controversy comes in, because we've got some pretty subversive ideas, especially for the time in which it was published. In fact, this is a very ideas-focused story, and it becomes increasingly so as the novel progresses. There's a lot of meditation on the human condition. There's a lot of discussion on things like philosophy and law and sex and politics and religion. And the way Heinlein does this is through dialogues or monologues sometimes, just lots and lots and lots of talking, basically. And it gets pretty tedious, to be honest. Now, if 2001 is high on exposition and light on conversation, which is very much the case, I think Stranger in the Strange Land is pretty much the polar opposite. This is a book of almost entirely dialogue, and there's just way too much of it. Once they start discussing politics and religion, everything slows down, and often it just comes across as an excuse for Heinlein to shove in as many as of his musings as possible. An excuse for him to get on his soapbox with the plot almost as an afterthought. So for me, this was the main problem I had when reading this book. There's just way too much of this. I didn't find it as annoying as The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, which is the only other Heinlein book I've read, which basically... that book, I think, comes across as like a manifesto for libertarianism, dressed up as a sci-fi novel. So it's not quite on that level, but I do think this book also does suffer from this pontificating, especially once you get to the second half of the book. It's just way too bloated. I think this book they could have cut it in half. But if you overlook these flaws, there's definitely an interesting story in here. Mike is a very intriguing character, so it's worth the read. If Heinlein had cut out all of the excessive dialogue and we had a much tighter, more polished novel, I think it would be a great improvement. As it is, I'm still glad I read it, and I'm going to give it 3 stars. Okay, and the final author is Isaac Asimov, and for him I picked Foundation. So this was published in 1951. It's the first book in the classic Foundation trilogy, which is probably one of the most influential series in the whole history of science fiction. So I read this nice vintage Panther paperback edition. This is a short novel, but it's very much big on ideas. It's with a plot that is epic in scope. I found it a very intellectually stimulating read. So this story takes place within a huge interstellar empire of the future. And this empire is very ancient and powerful and extraordinarily vast. It covers 1 million inhabited worlds. But it's actually very close to approaching its decline. Right at the start of the story, we get introduced to a brilliant mathematician known as Harry Seldon. And he predicts the collapse of the Galactic Empire within 300 years. How does he know this? Well, he uses an algorithmic scientific method which is known as psychohistory. And this draws on many fields, some quite diverse fields like history and sociology and economics, to make accurate forecasts about the fate of civilization. So he believes that this collapse is inevitable and it's going to happen pretty soon in the grand scheme of things. But of course, the authorities don't want to hear this. It's kind of a subversive thing to say. But rather than just executing him and making a martyr out of him, they decide to send him into exile. This is not just because they want to get rid of him, but also because of another prediction which he makes. And that is that when the empire falls, society is going to enter a dark age of chaos and regression. And as things stand, this will last for 30,000 years before civilization will rise again. That is his prediction. However, he also promises that this period could be reduced to just 1,000 years if measures are put in place now to preserve humanity's knowledge and science for future generations. So the Empire come up with this plan. They give him the resources he needs to set up a colony on his exile planet, which is known as Terminus, where he and his followers can work on a project to create an encyclopedia of mankind's knowledge and the key to changing the fate of the galaxy. So it's kind of like a refuge where this can be protected. And this colony that becomes known as the Foundation. But it's not going to be easy. Terminus is a desolate planet. It's on the fringes of the Empire. It's pretty poor in resources. They have no metals at all on the planet. And what's more, as the Empire's power weakens in its dying days, new threats are going to emerge. As the other outer planets break away from Imperial control, they have their own axes to grind. And Harry Seldon has predicted various crises related to this that are going to emerge over time. So he's predicted that everything that's going to happen. And throughout the rest of the novel, we basically follow each of these crisis points over the next 150 years or so. We follow a few different characters and the way they respond to each of these episodes and how they influence the course of events. And the focus is very much on the strategies that these characters use to survive throughout all of this political and economic turmoil. And I think this is where a lot of the really interesting and thought-provoking ideas come in. Each segment of the book acts like a kind of short story with some very clever twists and turns. And there's quite a lot of suspense actually throughout the story. There's plenty to enjoy, I think. I got a lot out of this. I'll definitely be continuing the trilogy. But that said, it won't appeal to everyone. It is pretty dated in a number of ways. This is very much a plot-focused and ideas-focused story. rather than character focused. And while these ideas are interesting, the prose can feel a bit dry at times, especially if you're used to modern space opera. It's not a major issue though. But another thing is the universe that Asimov built does feel very much a product of its time and pretty dated. You've got a very male-dominated society. There's lots of smoking cigars. There are frequent references to atomic energy as the panacea to solve all of our technological needs in the future. There are lots of male characters who play important roles, but almost no women. I think there's just one female supporting character in throughout the whole book, and she basically plays the role of a nagging wife of one of the rulers. So it's pretty dated, but I don't think that should put you off reading this. I'd say it's more quaint than anything else. It's not a major criticism. So if you go into this book with an open mind, without expecting modern standards of storytelling, I think you'll find an enjoyable political sci-fi novel with some entertaining episodes and plenty of compelling ideas. It didn't blow me away, but I did enjoy it. And I have a hunch that perhaps the best is still yet to come in this series. So I'm giving Foundation a score of 3.5 stars. So those were the big three authors that I read recently. I think of those three books, definitely my favourite was 2001: A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke. Let me know if you've read any of those three books and what your thoughts are. I'm thinking if I ever do this again, like a round two if you like, I've decided that probably the next three books I would choose from my bookshelf anyway. Arthur C. Clarke's The Fountains of Paradise, which actually won a Hugo Award. It's one of his later novels. I think that could be interesting. My only other Heinlein book that I have on my bookshelf that I haven't read, Revolt in 2100. Don't really know what that's about. And for Asimov, 9 Tomorrows, which is a short story collection. This has got very good reviews. It's got some classics in here. So maybe I'll get around to reading those at some point. But I probably won't do that anytime soon because I've got a few other ideas I'd like to do for themed book review trios. Anyway, I think it's been a long time since I've used the BookSpinner to pick my next read. So I think I'm going to give that a try now. So here's the BookSpinner as it stands at the minute with 86 books, 86 possibilities. Let's see what I'm going to read next. Remnant Population. Remnant Population by Elizabeth Moon. So this is a book that was recommended to me by Whitney from Secret Source of Storycraft last year. I've not read this author before. I do like this cover art. Let's have a look at the blurb and see what this is about. People had always told Ophelia what to do. For once, she was going to do what she wanted. She refused to get on the cryoships, refused to leave the only world she could call home. And when they finally came for her, she hid. Now the widow Ophelia is alone, the only remaining settler on an abandoned planet. Then new colonists arrive. At first she fears they have come to reoccupy the world she has come to think of hers. But they land far away. And as Ophelia secretly listens, they are slaughtered to the last child by a race of primitive aliens that no one even knew existed. And now only Ophelia can save the aliens from Earth's wrath. Interesting. Okay, well, I'll be reading this soon. Looking forward to that. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again soon.